Certainly one of the big questions for the men and women who work for the company is what will happen to the retirees and the current workers that are impacted by that bankruptcy filing. Joining us now is Robert Mason. He is chairman of the American Auto Worker Ownership Committee. There we go. Sorry about that. It's been a busy week, Robert. Thank you for joining us.
No problem, Brian.
What is it that you are looking for? And given that Chrysler's in Chapter 11 already, is there anything more that you can do?
Well, absolutely. What proposed yesterday actually migrates us closer towards 100% employee ownership for the stakeholders. And I want to be very clear, when we advocate 100% employee ownership, we're talking about line workers, we're talking about engineers, we're talking about management, and we want to progress this out to the dealer body as well, who've currently been really left out in the cold in this conversation.
Yeah, the dealers, from what I understand, that agreement with the dealers could be one of the main sticking points in bankruptcy. It sounds like that could be coming to a head. Do you think you can, I mean, right now, I guess the UAW is going to own about 55%, Fiat 35%. What would happen with Fiat? I mean, aren't they sort of the, I don't want to call them the savior, but sort of one of the aiders to Chrysler's situation right now? What happens to them?
Well, let's be perfectly clear about the Fiat situation. I led the team over at Chrysler to do the analysis and the recommendations for JVs with Nissan and Fiat. And part of the Fiat deal, it's geography related, it's distribution related, it's product related. But all of this takes time. So you're talking about 18 months minimum before you start seeing any of the product offerings coming on board, 3 to 5 years before you start seeing it really hit the financials, and 5 to 7 years to appreciate if it's really the right thing to do. So it does create the absolute potential of value, but the realization is TBD.
But between now and then, Robert, what happens to Chrysler as we know it?
Absolutely. Well, between now and then, there's going to be a significant reconfiguration of Chrysler, and that's what we're trying to step into the middle of that process. Had a meeting actually with the Auto Task Force yesterday. They're very open. They took a lot of our analysis, a lot of our data, and they're incorporating inside of their decision and their planning processes. But the fact that Chrysler's moved into the restructuring phase of bankruptcy really opens up the door for a lot of new configurations that, frankly, weren't on the table for consideration earlier.
Well, that's kind of, you hit on the next point I was going to make, Robert. I mean, at this point, what does the Auto Task Force have to do with it? I mean, it's in a bankruptcy court.
Well, the Auto Task Force has a significant job, and they understand what they're doing, and they've been very open and bringing the stakeholders to the table. But that said, there's a lot of ways to do this wrong and very few to do it right, and there's a lot of moving balls. They're going to be working very hard to thread the needle and try to find some way to be equitable to all the stakeholders. And the bankruptcy judge
isn't that the court's job, Robert? I mean, I hear what you're saying, but isn't that the court's job now? The U.S. government should be completely out of this. No?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the U.S. government's still going to be mitigating and having conversations with stakeholders, and what's being queued up with Chrysler is still going to have relevancy for GM moving forward. So the Auto Task Force hasn't completed their work, but definitely the bankruptcy judge is going to be taking the lead on trying to find some ways to spread the pain out equitably among everyone.
Robert, you talk about 55% for the UAW, a smaller percentage for Fiat, government involvement. It just sounds like an utter mess.
It is a very complex issue, and to suggest it's not would be irresponsible. But with respect to the 55% to the union ownership, I am opposed to that. I believe the employee should get ownership of that, and that still be determined how that ownership structure is put together. Because the reality is providing equity to the union is really rewarding them for negotiating for the wrong things to begin with. They negotiated for years for wages and benefits, which are top-line drags on the company. What they should have negotiated for was wealth, negotiated for profit. And that, instead of negotiating for the crumbs, they should have negotiated for the pie, and they wouldn't have this conversation.
That is a great
now.
point, because we also tend to forget there are non-union workers at these companies. The non-union workers, I guarantee you, are going to be kicked to the floor by the UAW if they can, right, to protect their own jobs. I think that's a fair statement, right? I mean, they have no protection whatsoever. And under 100% ESOP, I'm not saying it'll work. I don't know the numbers as well as you do, but at least then it is less of a sort of a confrontational relationship.
Absolutely. It's a collaborative relationship, and let's be frank, 100% ESOP is the only methodology that all the stakeholders have an opportunity to get something. There's an upside potential for them for all their concessions. And again, that's spread out not to just to the union body, that's the engineers, management, and the dealer body, which again is kind of left out in the cold on this one.
Well, also, left out in the cold, what about General Motors, given what Chrysler has just gone through?
Yeah, and this is a great litmus test. Watching what is going on with Chrysler, I think portends a lot of the activities for General Motors. So I think we should be watching this Chrysler activity very, very closely, and there's going to be some course corrections from General Motors and the Auto Task Force based off of how this starts rolling out. But they're very, very highly linked, and they're moving forward quickly. On a daily basis, this is changing.
Well, Robert Mason, you got some work to do, so we'll let you get back. Robert Mason,
Absolutely.
Chairman of the American
Hey.
Auto Worker Ownership Committee. I got it right that time. Robert, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time, Dagen. Thanks, Brian.
All right, take care.